Okay, welcome to Mind Snacks. Probably video number 2. 2022 January. I'm reading a reading assignment that I did several years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, while in college. It was on a book called it was called The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease by Marc Lewis. Okay, The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease is a very interesting and informative book with regards to the many issues that come up with the subject of addiction. The author, Marc Lewis, has a lot of incredible insights into the world of addiction for several reasons. One, he suffered firsthand with severe addictions as a young man while he was in his 20s up until about the age of 30. This definitely gave him a front row seat to the harsh realities of addiction. Number 2, he's trained in developmental psychology and neuroscience, giving him a firm grasp on the scientific theories surrounding addiction. He claims that his background work with developmental psychology has helped him to see addiction with a more holistic viewpoint than a lot of the people in the mostly biological scientific addiction realm. And 3, he has worked with and interacted with many people with hardcore addictions. And 4, he interviewed several different people with varied forms of addictions, and in the book, he uses 5 of his interview subjects, which helped him best to illustrate his philosophy in the clearest way possible. The people interviewed in the book run the gamut, covering hardcore alcohol, methamphetamine, heroin, over-the-counter prescription medication, among other drugs. One of the ladies portrayed had an eating disorder as well. With each person, the author would teach us lessons and pepper the stories with scientific and philosophical information regarding addictions. These kind of insights illuminate and give the reader a chance to learn about the addict's personal journeys, while also having first-class tutorials on some of the philosophical and scientific theories within the subject of addiction. In regard to the overall purpose of the book, I would like to address the most important topics and key takeaways from the book. In my opinion, the overarching topic of the book is the author's opinion why addiction is not a disease. Aside from that, the main key takeaways were addiction as a disease model, the rejection of addiction as disease model, number 3, the author's definition and explanation of addiction, and 4, quitting addiction and helping people to quit. The addiction as disease model. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA website, this is a quote, addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing brain disease that is characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite harmful consequences, end quote. There is a lot of debate within the community of addiction professionals on how to go about helping people to recover from addiction. The question of whether or not addiction is a disease is a major and a substantial issue within the debate. Marc Lewis actually does offer some caveats for some of the positive aspects of the addiction as disease model that is added to the addiction community, in addition to what he views as often negative aspects of the addiction as disease model. For one, there is generally more accepted and less judgmental attitudes in regards to addicted people in the general public view than there has been in times long past. This is very important because in the past time, addiction was often severely looked down upon as a morally weak character flaw. This kind of shame oftentimes only exacerbates the problem. In addition to that, he does think that the biological studies that have come about have contributed to many positive implications which help to understand addiction. He just thinks that doctors and scientists can be over-reliant on scientific data and tend to miss out on the other personalized ways of helping addicts to quit their addictions. For instance, in the introduction of the book, he says, I believe that the disease idea is wrong, and that its wrongness is compounded by a biased view of the neural data and by doctors and scientists' habit of ignoring the personal. It's an idea that can be replaced not by shunning the biology of addiction, but by examining it more closely and then connecting it back to lived experience. Medical researchers are correct that the brain changes with addiction, but the way it changes has to do with learning and development, not disease. In other parts of the book, Marc Lewis also states that changes in the brain during addiction is definitely an important issue in regards to the knowledge of addiction treatment. On page 162, he states, quote, "The disease model is the only coherent model of addiction that actually pays attention to the brain changes reported by hundreds of labs and thousands of scientific articles," end quote. He also goes on to say, quote, "It may also have some real clinical utility. It makes sense of the helplessness addicts feel and encourages them to expiate their guilt and shame by validating their belief that they're unable to get better by themselves," end quote. So he does give credence to the fact that some people may be relieved of some of their shame with the model of addiction as disease. My second key takeaway in the book is rejecting the addiction as disease model. Even though the author attributes certain positive points to addiction as disease model, by and large, he thinks the disease model should be rejected. He has several reasonings for rejecting this model, and in the book, he says the main reason is every experience that is repeated enough times because of its motivational appeal will change the wiring of the striatum and related regions, while adjusting the flow and uptake of dopamine. Yet we wouldn't want to call the excitement we feel when visiting Paris, meeting a lover, or cheering for our favorite team a disease. Each rewarding experience builds its own network, or synapses in and around the striatum and OFC, and these networks continue to draw dopamine from its reservoir in the midbrain. That's true of Paris, romance, football, and heroin, end quote. That quote illustrates that even positive personal experiences change the brain as well, not just addiction. However, that does not mean the experiences are actually diseases. As a matter of fact, according to the author, we should reject the disease model because every experience that is repeated enough times because of its motivational appeal will change the wiring of the striatum. My third takeaway point of the book is Marc Lewis's definition and explanation of addiction. The author views addiction as an ingrained habit interspersed with deep learning. It seems important to note, since the author doesn't accept the addiction as disease theory, how in fact does he define addiction? According to Mr. Lewis, quote, "It's a habit that grows and self-perpetuates relatively quickly when we repeatedly pursue the same highly attractive goal." Or in a phrase, motivated repetition that gives rise to deep learning. Addicted patterns grow more quickly and become more deeply entrenched than other less compelling habits because of the intensity of attraction that motivates us to repeat them, especially when they leave us grasping for more and other goals have lost their appeal. Marc Lewis's reasons for citing addiction as a deep learning process is, quote, "Because the onset of addiction must include one or more phases of accelerated learning, but can also simmer for longer periods," end quote. So the addiction is deep learning and habitual, and he likens it as similar to other negative directions one can take in personal development. He says, quote, "Self-reinforcing habit is based on intense emotions, encountered repeatedly. Most importantly, these developmentally shoots, those we see as personality changes, and those we see as addiction, can sprout at the same time, each growing out of the other, supporting the other," end quote. So with this knowledge of addiction as a deep learned and ingrained habit, how can this knowledge be used to help one quit their addiction? That leads me to my fourth takeaway of the book. Number 4 is quitting addiction and helping people to quit. The author says in the book, many of those who treat addiction believe that the most effective tools target cognitive and motivational processes such as self-determination, insight, willpower, and self-love forgiveness. There is no disease that can be arrested by tapping such resources. The author claims that many failures in recovery has to do with the exhaustion of self-control. Addiction takes time, and there are many deep mental habits that have been built. How does it get to the point where people can move beyond their addictions? For instance, in the book, Natalie, a lady in the book, was addicted to heroin, and it took being in prison to be able to actually get a hold of some of the psychological tools, such as meditation, to help her slow down her mind and begin to process her thoughts and begin the process of healing from addiction. Every person is different, and it may not be predictable to figure out what kind of treatment will work for each person. The author says, what will work best is whatever is available when the synaptic avenues of desire make contact with brain regions responsible for perspective change. This can be the presence of a friend who accompanies you to your first 12-step meeting. And he cites some other possibilities, such as jail cell, a month on your grandfather's farm, a book, meditation, or maybe antidepressant therapy. In conclusion, I think that the book ingeniously invites the reader to become thoroughly engrossed in the stories of his interview subjects. And then he would present philosophical and scientific theories that related to the context of the true stories. It made for a very interesting book to study, and a look at addiction as something more beyond a disease of the brain.